Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Nishant, and welcome to another episode of the Nishant Garg Show. The mission of the show is to spread awareness on mindfulness practices, psychology, mental health, and spirituality. My job on the show is to invite world class performers to share the practices to live a fulfilled life. This episode guest is Laurie. Laurie is founder of Simply Be Organized, mom, wife, entrepreneur, and coffee lover. She hosts a weekly podcast, This Organized Life, and wrote a book, Hot Mess, a practical guide to getting organized. This book is a guide for anyone who has felt overwhelmed and needs some simple strategies to get on track. In this episode, Laurie talks about emotional, mental, physical, and calendar clutter, how to prioritize the day, and how to handle the anxiety. To know more, keep listening. Laurie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm thrilled and excited to have you. How would your family describe what you do for a living?
My family, they would say I am a professional organizer that helps people get rid of stuff that they no longer need or serves them well.
Could you elaborate more on what kind of organization do you do?
So I started my business primarily doing residential home organizing back in 2009 during the height of the recession, when a lot of people were losing their jobs and their homes, and there was a period of uncertainty. Not, obviously different than it is what we're going through today, but it was really, there was a lot of fear and anxiety that was surrounding people. And what I noticed was people were having clutter in their lives as either a scapegoat. They were either shopping to kind of numb a pain, or they were holding on to things out of fear. And there was a stress and anxiety level that they were facing in their homes. And a lot of the things that I saw people struggling with were areas that I felt if they had a better system or strategy to deal with some of these physical things that were in their space, it could free them up to make room for other things in their lives. And so I started working with people one-on-one and doing a lot of consulting and in-home work. And then over time, that business grew into doing more speaking and larger scale events and pivoting into writing, and then eventually hosting my own podcast. And really my goal, and I tell people this, is just to help you live simply and work smarter. That doesn't necessarily have to mean that you need to be a minimalist, but I think the one thing that we all crave is time. And I also think that the other thing that we all crave is, freedom. And I see clutter as a roadblock to giving us the freedom to do what we want, or the space in our, either our physical space or just our mental bandwidth to be able to focus on the things that really matter to us. And so that's what I do, is I help people, whether it's with physical stuff or just eliminating the unnecessary from their lives.
And it can be emotional clutter, it can be mental clutter, it doesn't have to be physical clutter. And going back to 2009, when you saw that people are having fear and anxieties during recession times, was there any point in your life when you were going through the same situation?
Well, not to the extent, but what I learned early on, when I have two daughters that are now 19 and 16, but when my older daughter was a baby, my husband traveled quite a bit. And so I was, sort of a single mom quite a bit during the week at least. And once my second daughter came into the picture and I was juggling two toddlers, and at the time I was working a little bit, then I took some time off to be a stay-at-home mom. But throughout that entire period, I realized that I needed routine in order to help keep myself sane. So it was about being able to be deliberate and intentional with the time that I had. So I needed to map things out as if I were in a job outside of the home, where I had priorities, and I had systems and strategies of knowing where either information was or resources were. And I really just started to implement these own practices into my own life. And so as a result of that, it wasn't so much of it being rigidity, but having these routines allowed me to enjoy some downtime, allowed me to be able to do multiple different things because I had put these practices and plans and strategies in play. And so many of my friends were struggling, and they weren't having that same sense of freedom, or they were always feeling tired and exhausted about whether it was endless laundry or endless dishes or meal planning or whatever, you could fill in the blank.
This is very common.
Yeah. And I said, there's so many things that are, you're going back to when my kids were little, and this is like post 9/11, and like we're dealing with so many real things that are fear and stress inducing. Your house should be a place of calm. Your house, and even if you have little kids with physical stuff and there is a lot going on, how can we streamline the process to make this a more calm and peaceful environment? I know that you obviously talk a lot about mindfulness, and I think it's in some way an extension of that, even if it's not being practiced in your traditional sense. It's knowing that you're developing these habits and these rituals that are giving you space.
This is very exciting and fascinating to me, and I would like to go deeper and deeper in creating routines and habits. And going back to the same time when you were creating habits, routines, and rituals in your house, usually people create routines and talk about routines in their professional life. Nobody talks about creating such kind of rituals and discipline around the house. Why did you choose to create routines in the house? What was your motivation at the time?
I was an executive recruiter in my past life. And so I worked primarily with a lot of sales and marketing executives. I focused a lot in the .com industry kind of back in the day. And I always, work with people that take a lot of pride in their careers, and the things that they do and the actions they take are very deliberate and I don't want to say calculated, but there's a methodology behind the steps that they take and the things that they do to get to where they want to be professionally. And I started seeing, colleagues of mine who were then transitioning into becoming parents, and some of them were going back to work. Others were deciding to become stay-at-home moms. And it was that whole just a mom, I'm using my air quotes, and feeling this loss of control, because all of a sudden they went from a structured routine of, I get dressed, I commute, I do this, I have all of these different things in place, to not having any of these designed accountability. And so I said, if you can reframe that thought process of just a stay-at-home mom, or I'm a working mom and my home is the afterthought, and you start reframing it as I'm the CEO of my house, and I look at all of the things that need to get done in order to run a company, there's a lot of logistics, and that doesn't change whether you have a paycheck or not. All of these things still need to get done. And so I started looking at, everything from, whether it's marketing or operations or shopping or, whatever you're going to be doing. And just like you would in a business, what can you outsource? What can you streamline? What can you delegate? What is a good use of your time? What is taking you away from your core mission? And actually one of the first things that when I was first starting to write and blog, and when I got published, I wrote this article called Being the CEO of Your Home. And it really just talked about how you can start looking at, if you look at yourself as the CEO doesn't do every single job in a company.
Yes.
they delegate. They know the areas that are their strengths, and they know the areas that are their weaknesses, or that other people
It's
are
about
better
knowing
suited to do
the
that.
vital function. What is your vital function that only you can do, and you cannot delegate this? And what you're saying is we can apply the same principle in our own house, and figuring out what matters the most and that we enjoy and only we can do. And if we don't enjoy anything or we don't want to do it, we can delegate.
Well, to some extent. I mean, the reality of it is I might not enjoy laundry, but if I'm home, I have to do it, right? Like if I have babies, they're not doing the laundry, So I think there are, I think there's a certain degree of, yes, there. Look at your low hanging fruit. What are the tasks in your life that you have to do? If you enjoy cooking, then cook. If you find that meal prep and coming home after a long day at the office, if coming home and preparing a healthy meal is stressing you out, well, there's a host of meal delivery or meal prep services that you can use. If you don't like shopping, you can opt to do Instacart. So there's so many other ways and shortcuts that we can do to still achieve the same thing. So yes, there are going to be certain things, I don't subscribe to you can only have things that are going to bring you joy, or you can only surround yourself, because I think in life, especially if you're a parent, there's just things that are going to take up space in your home for a particular season. It's not necessarily going to be forever, but you're going to need to be able to create space, whether that's physical space or mental bandwidth for these things, or space in your calendar, to be able to do these things. But if you can prioritize the stuff that is kind of the least amount of pain points, and the stuff that you have to do, being strategic of, okay, I don't really love laundry, but the reality of it is it needs to get done. So then it's a matter of, when do you do this? When do you plan it? Do you let it build up? Do you do laundry once a week? What are the systems and strategies in order to make this task more palatable?
In fact, we can put those strategies and systems into the calendar so that we get a reminder all the time.
100%. I think that's really the key, is you need to establish. I mean, I recently started doing my own very small mindfulness practice, because that's always been a thing that I've struggled with, is kind of quieting my mind. But I had to put it on my calendar as a recurring task. I have the times that I go to do Pilates on my calendar. This is the day. It is blocked on my calendar. And I think for somebody that maybe struggles with doing, whether it's household tasks or just being smart with their time and utilizing it and maximizing it, doing an exercise like time blocking or chunking or writing things down and putting the actual reminders on your calendar are a great tool. I try to leave as little up to memory as possible. I think there's too much decision fatigue that we all have to, that we have, we shouldn't have to tax our brains any more than we need to.
You just mentioned two words, time block and chunking. Mm-hmm. Can you elaborate more on that for our listeners?
Sure. So the way I talk about time blocking is sort of like one would keep a food diary, right? So when I meet with a client and I want to talk to them about all the things that they do, because one of the most common things that I hear people say is, I just don't have time. I don't have time. There's not enough hours in the day. And always. So I say, I think we've become, a society that's, there's a level of truth to that. But I think when we start to write it down, it's very truth telling to see how we're spending our time, where we're spending it. I mean, I remembered, I make the analogy to, back in the day when I used to keep a food diary, a food log. And I'm like, I don't snack. And then when I was really, putting pen to paper, I was like, well, I did finish those chicken nuggets off my kid's plate, or, oh, I did, grab a handful of pretzels or whatever. So we start to see these things that we just don't really account for add up. And I specifically see people where I say, write down your commute time, write down the time it takes you, if you have younger kids, what's your buffer time to get the kids loaded in the car to get to where you want to be? Yes, the store might be 5 minutes away, but it might be a 15-minute process for you to be able to get them there,
It will be a pain to go through all this process, but
For
once
sure.
we do it over and over, it becomes our unconscious habit.
Absolutely. And so once you've done that sort of brain dump, and I always tell people to do it for a solid week, because different days we have kind of different expectations and different responsibilities. So if you start to see some patterns, that's really helpful. And then what I do is I have people prioritize what are the top 3 things that you really need to accomplish on this particular given day, whether it's phone calls, whether it's taking the car in to get service, whether it's I need to focus in on something, for scheduling something, whatever it is that you need to do. Or it could be, hey, I need to tackle my closet, or whatever it is. So look at those tasks and prioritize them.
Prioritize a day before or on the same day in the morning, or what do you suggest?
I don't think there's a one size fits all. I mean, I try to say, I like to group things into categories. So I'll be like, okay, let's look at all the phone calls that we have to make. Let's say all the things that we need to schedule, all the errands we need to run. If we're talking obviously specifically about organizing in the residential area, let's look at all the different activities. And just like you would group, in your cabinet or your closet, like with like, I would do the same thing for all the things that are on your plate, on your to-do list, so to speak. And I would group them by category. And I would say, okay, some people, if that I would look at when you have your biggest productivity burst and tackle maybe the ones that are going to give you the most energy that are going to require the most energy. Do that. If you're a morning person, do it in the morning. If you know that, you have some kind of boring answering emails and just responding to people on the computer or whatever you need to do, and it doesn't require a lot of mental bandwidth, and you have an opportunity to do that later in the day or in the evening after you put the kids to bed or you come home from a long day of work, block those times and chunk them then. I think you could plan out your calendar. It depends on the person. Some people are planners and like to plan out a week in advance. Other people like to plan out a day before. I do think it's nice to be able to wake up in the morning and have your day planned for you. I don't think you should necessarily be planning it that day. I think that just, again, causes additional inadvertent procrastination.
Yes. What 3 priorities you achieved today?
Did I? Okay. So this is my 3rd podcast recording of the day. So I had 3 podcasts. One of them was my podcast that I was recording. And so I recorded that. And then I was a guest on 2 shows, including yours. So I made sure I prepped for that. In addition to that, I had some follow-up for a webinar that I had hosted a couple weeks ago. So I had some follow-up emails that I need to send for that. So I did those. And I checked in for me on my social media. So my tasks, for there were very focused towards, those jobs that I had for work a lot. And not every day has to be something that is, if depending on kind of where you are in your life, in what season you are, some days you're going to, some people are going to be listening and they're going to have to do laundry and unload the dishwasher every day. And somebody that lives alone might be able to get away with doing laundry once a week and running the dishwasher every other day, So everybody's bandwidth and everybody's circumstances are going to be different. Excuse me. One of the things that I try to do for myself as a tip, I do a lot of volunteer work, and in addition to being a mom and having my own business and all that comes along with that, when I do my volunteer work, it's very easy for me to kind of get lost in that and go down a rabbit hole. So I, a while ago, delegated Fridays as my day that I would prioritize things for with any volunteer or community service or things that I was working on. So I know for myself, if I receive emails throughout the week or something comes up that I need to do, obviously I have a pretty good response time. So I will say to somebody, I'll get back to you on Friday when I'm doing, when I'm following up with that. So I think it's important to set boundaries and expectations.
Yes. And I believe that it takes time. It takes time to be aware of our patterns. If we feel that this task is taking so much time every day, or if it doesn't have to be done every single day, then how can we batch? How can we put them into category? It takes work. It is always evolving. It's not something constant.
Absolutely. For sure. I mean, like anything, it's a practice and it's going to be fluid. And there are times in your life where you're going to be like really, really on top of your game and things are going to be moving along. And then something is going to pop up. It could be for, something really good. It could be something that maybe wasn't so good, but that you're going to have to pivot. And maybe things that you were prioritizing may have to take a back seat temporarily so that you could focus on something else. And I think it has to do really with giving yourself that permission to realize that we can't be all things all the time.
Yes, some days are just not productive and it's okay. We don't have to judge ourselves for
Absolutely.
being not productive. And the strong distinction to understand is effectiveness versus efficiency, doing the things that matter. If what we are doing is really effective or not, then we shouldn't be doing it at all.
Absolutely. And because I talk about, busy versus productive, we can all be busy, but are we really being productive? And sometimes the most productive thing you could be doing is sitting down and watching TV or reading a book. Being productive doesn't, right. Sometimes that's what you need. So understanding that. And at the end of the day, I started this business because I saw people dealing with a lot of shame around their homes and about how that made them feel. And after walking in from a day of running around with the kids or a day at the office, when they came home and they saw piles of mail and they saw dishes in the sink and they saw like loads of laundry and they just felt overwhelmed and they felt that they didn't have a strategy or plan of action. I wanted to be able to provide that roadmap to say this is doable. And that way, when you do come home, you're not feeling that way.
Yes. When you were saying that, piling up the dishes, piling up the emails, kids, I was visualizing and I was feeling anxiety, a little bit of anxiety. So when people have that thing in their houses, so many things are going on. It happens to everybody. This is a very common thing. And it elevates the anxiety level. What practices do you suggest to reduce our anxiety and worries to handle that properly?
Well, I think everybody's going to be handling it differently. I think you need to identify sort of where your biggest pitfall is, right? So I talked about the fact that clutter can manifest itself in three main forms, right? At least the way that I describe it. I talk about the physical clutter, the emotional clutter, and then your calendar clutter. But once you have that identified, then we need to dig a little bit deeper. And there are 5 main clutter pitfalls that I've identified that people tend to fall into, which maybe paralyzes them from being able to take productive action or any action at all. And I can, if it's okay, I'll just run through them. Yep.
Yeah, please.
So the first one is procrastination. The second one is indecision, not knowing what to do. The third one is guilt that either they should know what to do or guilt that they have accumulated this stuff in the first place. The fourth one is overwhelm, just feeling of overwhelm of whether that are looking at this or that this is something that they have to chip away at. And then the fifth one is time, just carving out the time to be able to take action on their clutter, whatever that looks like.
I think for me, it is time.
Yeah, time.
Yep.
I think for a lot of people, time. And what happens is once we start to kind of look at clutter as the symptom and unpack it is, are you not doing these things? Are these things standing in your way because of which of these are the more dominant? Because it can, of course, be a mixture. Overwhelm can lead to procrastination. Indecision can also lead, like they can all, if you were to look at a model, like they absolutely overlap. They can absolutely be like concentric circles. But understanding that, okay, if this is a pain point for you, then let's figure out a strategy to get to the root of it and then figure out how to navigate. So if it's time that is then causing it, so then let's do a deep dive into your time. How are you spending your time? What are the things that you're struggling with? And how much time are those tasks going to take? And where can we reclaim hours in your week to be able to do that? Or where can we delegate to somebody else so that it gets done?
Buying more time.
Yeah.
And in your life, how do you manage overwhelm? What do you do when you feel overwhelmed?
I drink a lot of Tito's.
I thought you drink a lot of wine.
Well, that too. But yeah, I think for me, I don't like the physical clutter. When I see that, it's something that does cause, I see that again, when I start to see a lot of physical clutter piling up, it's because I feel like I'm neglecting something in a particular area. And again, that's not to say my house is perfect, but when I start to feel that things are out of my control, if I start to look at other areas that I've been neglecting and start to reprioritize them, it doesn't take me long to get back on track. Just as I would imagine when you're practicing mindfulness, sometimes just sitting there and quieting yourself will bring you back to a level of calm.
And speaking of mindfulness, what practices do you have in your day-to-day life, if you have?
Yeah. So I always get up. I mean, now my kids are older, so they sleep later. But when they were younger, I always made a point of getting up at least 15 minutes before them, if not, more. My kids were always, when they were younger, they were early risers. So I was not getting up an hour before, but sometimes I would get up a half an hour before. But even if I had 15 minutes to get up when the house was quiet, sit, have a cup of coffee. I'm a coffee drinker. So, but whether it's having your coffee or having your tea and just sit in the quiet. And I didn't have a traditional mindfulness practice, but I wouldn't look at my phone. I wouldn't turn the TV on. I would just kind of sit there and process my day and just kind of, appreciate the fact that I'm here another day and just allow myself to sit in the moment before the
noise starts.
Before everything started, because I'm a go person and that's fine. So once that switch gets flipped, I'm pretty much on for the next 12, 14 hours or whatever. So that is my coveted time. And that's something that if I don't have that for whatever reason, that definitely, I could see how that sets the tone for my day.
Now, what do you do? What's your specific routine look like in the morning?
So I don't know when exactly you're going to air this, but right now we are, in the midst of quarantine. So I've been sleeping a little bit later than normally just because the house is a little bit quieter because we don't have, commutes and getting off to school and all that. So I sleep till about 7. I get up, I come downstairs, I do a small devotional, and then I will sit and have my coffee, and then I will read for a little bit. And once I read, I try to read some sort of like leadership or business type books that I'm interested in, or something that I think is going to, help with personal development. And I usually read a chapter, and then I will come upstairs, and I have been listening to just some like guided meditation, or not guided meditation, sorry, it's just some like meditation music. I don't like talking in my ear while I'm trying to like sit, but I've been just trying to sit. I can go for like 10 or 12 minutes before I start getting antsy. And then I'm like, okay, if I set my timer for like 15 minutes, I could start seeing it like minute 12. I'm like looking at the clock. And then I will either take the dog for a walk if it's nice, or exercise in my home, obviously right now, and then shower and kind of like start my day. So I try not to look at my phone for like the first hour that I'm awake. I think that makes a big difference for me, because I can't unsee it, right? If I see an email, I'm going to want to act on it. So I can't unsee it. If I see something on social media that someone tagged me in and I want to respond to it, I can't. It's very difficult for me to just, put that to the side. So I wait until I can take action, and then I go ahead and look ahead.
Would you recommend anybody to have some sort of morning routines?
I do recommend, but I think you have to know yourself, right? I think for me, I could speak to the fact that, I'm more of a morning person. I'm not a night owl. I never have been. But I think there are people that get their energy at night. That is when they feel the most creative. That is when they feel where they have the most mental space. So I think it's important. I would love to say, yeah, everybody start their day this way, but depending on what your lifestyle is like, that might not be, if you have a job that you're working at night, if you're a musician or a bartender or you might work till wee hours and then sleep. And so your internal clock might be different. I think the important thing is to get a practice at some point in the day where you can plan and prepare and just, think about what it is that you want to accomplish in order to be productive. Because what happens is if we don't put that in anywhere, then we just go through the motions without any intention.
We become like a free bird.
Yeah.
And being a free bird doesn't serve.
And I think there's nothing worse than, putting your head down on the pillow at night and feeling exhausted and going, what did I know I'm exhausted. I was on the go all day. And what did I really accomplish? I mean, I think that's a very deflating feeling for anybody.
And asking really good questions to yourself when we feel overwhelmed. And I do this practice a lot these days. I've been doing it for the last couple of months, really sitting down with a notebook, pen and paper, just whenever I'm feeling overwhelmed, just writing down what is there in my mind, putting everything on a piece of paper, and then thinking about prioritizing, and sometimes when we prioritize, it gets into analysis and paralysis mode. So taking action, just whatever is there, just take some action and start doing it.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I totally agree.
People talk about having morning routines, but this may not be suitable for everybody because of their routines or whatever happens to be. And you mentioned that some routines, some habits, rituals will create time freedom. Discipline will create time freedom. I want to ask you that. I have heard people saying that discipline, why we need to have that kind of discipline, why we have to be a slave to our calendar. What do you think about that?
I mean, I don't like the fact of feeling like I'm a slave to my calendar. I actually look at my calendar as an opportunity to create to the best of my ability, the way that I am, like reclaiming my own time. So as opposed to being reactive and just allowing things to pile up on my calendar. It allows me to set these, whatever your situation is, where you're saying, listen, I am not going to schedule, any evening events more than twice a week, so that I'm blocking my calendar so that I could have family time, or I could have time to work on a hobby or a passion project or a side hustle or just family, whatever it is, making those, I don't want to say kind of putting up those guardrails or setting some restrictions around your calendar so that it makes it harder to say yes to things. And that way, that you're only saying yes to the things that really matter.
Yes. Do you recommend some books for our listeners to really get a deep dive into all these things, into organizing their life?
Well, of course, I'm going to tell people I think that they should get my book.
What because is your book name?
Well, my book is called Hot Mess, A Practical Guide to Getting Organized. And it is broken into 3 distinct sections. The first one is understanding clutter, what it is. I do a much deeper dive into the physical, emotional, and calendar clutter. And then the second is specific strategies of how to tackle each one of those, because your approach is probably going to differ slightly based on where your clutter pitfalls are and which area you struggle with. And then the third section is organizing your space room by room. So the first 2 sections I recommend people reading sequentially. And then the third one, you can either read it sort of cover to cover, or you can pick the areas that speak to you. So for example,
I personally need the third one.
You need the third one? Yeah. So I think that's a great resource. I also have, I'm looking at my bookshelf right now. There's a book called Take Back Your Time. And it's from a woman who is another professional organizer. Her name is Morgan Tyree. That's Tyree. And she's got a great book called Take Back Your Time. Identify your priorities, decrease stress, and increase productivity. So I think that's a great book. And also Gretchen Rubin has a great book called Outer Order, Inner Calm. So I think those are 3 really good resources specifically towards looking at if the stuff in your home is causing you stress or anxiety. Those are 3 great resources.
Yes, thank you for your recommendations. And before I ask you my last question, I would like to ask you, what makes you happy and fulfilled in life?
Playing with my dog. I mean, on a big scale, I love being able to use my gifts to help other people, because again, I'm not curing cancer. Like, this is not life-changing in the grand sense, but I have seen the impact of people feeling that they've been able to reclaim their space and how that affects their self-esteem and how that affects their mood and their stress. So I'm very fortunate that I get to do something on a day-to-day basis that I really am passionate about. So I love that. So that definitely brings me joy, but I'm a homebody. Like, I don't need a lot. I'm pretty low maintenance. So for me to just be able to spend time with friends and family and relax, like, I don't need a lot of bells and whistles. I'm a simpleton.
And where can our listeners find you online?
So the best place to find me is at my website, which is simply the letter B like boy organized.com. From there, you can connect up with me. I'm all over social media at Simply Be Organized. And then my podcast, obviously, if you're listening to this, your podcast listeners, I invite you to check out my podcast, which is called This Organized Life.
And I will put all the details in the show notes.
Great.
Thank you so much, Laurie. It's been an amazing conversation.
Well, likewise. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this podcast episode today. I hope you learned from this episode that you can apply in your life. If you did enjoy this, please subscribe to the podcast, The Nishant Garg Show, on Apple Podcast. You can also subscribe to the show through my website, https://nishantgarg.me, NISHANTGARG.me. You can also share this podcast with your family and friends or whoever want to feel fulfilled. And thank you so much again.